Welcome back to another episode of the Vision Pod, where guests are handpicked to bring value to your everyday life. Enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of the Vision Pod. Today I have my grandpa on. I'm actually named after him. My middle name is William, and his name is William Hall. Yeah. So I'm super happy to have you on. Thanks for coming.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, perfect. My grandpa always has taught me a lot in life, so I kind of wanted to have him on so he could share his insights. He's quite the theologian and bookworm, I guess. So I guess we can start with a story. Do you kind of want to tell how you became a Christian?
Yeah, I'm really happy to tell that story. I went to university at the University of Saskatchewan. So the year was 1967. I had graduated in 66, didn't know what I was going to be or do. So didn't go to university, didn't really think that would be what I would do, but just said, like, I'm going to take a year off. Not a year off, a year to work.
That's right, yeah.
And that was an okay year for me, but not a great year. And I decided to go then to university in 1968. I was 20 years old.
Okay, what were you going to university for?
Actually, yeah, the first year was 1967. Yeah,
okay, so. Yeah. What were you going to university for?
Well, I was in arts.
Okay.
Because I didn't know what I wanted to be or do, or I didn't really know who I really was. So the fact is that I had a lot of growing up to do. I think you reach that place where you think it's all going to be there. You finish, you graduate high school, you think, I do know what I want, but I didn't. I didn't know who I really was or what to do with this next step. I just knew that it was on up to me to do.
Right, yeah.
So that year out didn't really advance that story very far. I still didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do. And after the end of the first year of university, I still didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I got the letter from the dean at Christmas of that year at university. That was the end of 67. And the dean of arts has said, look, if this is as hard as you're prepared to work, maybe you should do something else. This is a general letter that most students that were just barely surviving would get.
Yeah.
So that was my note that I was on notice that I was going to have to do more than play bridge in order to get a degree. And so that didn't really change my scholastic attitude, but was a reflection of the fact that things weren't really going great.
That's right.
So at the end of university, it came along at the end of that first year, and going back for the second year in the fall, I was actually in 1968. Lots of things were happening in the world. It was a very intriguing time. I mean, before that year is done, Martin Luther King will have been murdered. The assassination of just a number of significant things are going on. It's a year when Detroit is burning, riots, lot of unrest. Vietnam War had caused lots of unrest on university campuses in the States. Some of that filtered up to where I was going to school at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. And so that meant that this was a big changing moment in history. I mean, the beginning of the Jesus People movement was beginning to happen, and not that I was aware of it at the time. I wasn't. I mean, I guess I was, because classrooms were dealing with the Berkeley, California was kind of the head of a lot of changes in the way people were approaching and thinking about life, and so some of that was filtering up to us in Saskatchewan. So, as I entered this school that year, I knew I needed to be more involved. So at one level of involvement was I decided to play university sports. So there was a soccer team. I tried out for it and made the team. And the guy that I played soccer alongside, Howard Dirks, was just a terrific man. I mean, he really... I just enjoyed being around him. He was always laughing, always full of life, and I was the blue streak seldom stopped out of my mouth with words. So I was an unfulfilled person in some way, but he was somebody who was really happy with who he was and with life in general.
Yeah.
And at university campus, I ran into him at lunch one day in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And I went, he said, well, come on, sit with us. And there were a number of people there that I liked them all. We had good conversations. This went on for a number of weeks. And it ended up that every Tuesday, I noticed, there was a bit of a rhythm. They'd get up and say, we got to go. And so I said, well, where are you going? They're going down to a Bible study. I said, oh, what? You do what? And they said, well, we study the Bible. Why would you do that? So it was a mystery to me that somebody as intelligent as what I understood Howard to be would be doing that.
Yeah.
And so I'd say, no, I don't want anything to do with that. And so I was going out to the book tables at the university campus. Mm-hmm. And on the book table were kind of representative of all these various philosophies, whether it was political or sociological philosophies that were part of the world. I'm more interested in learning about, I don't know, Hare Krishna or something like what,
right.
I think the last place in the world that I expected to find anything would have been in the church.
Okay.
So while I had grown up, we had maybe been sent to school, but when Mom found out that we were using that money to ride the bus around instead of going to church, because they never went with us, mm-hmm. Then she decided that was a poor investment too. So so our home was we weren't a Christian home, if mm-hmm. I was to speak of now what I would understand that to be. I think at the time I'd have probably said, well, I guess we were as Christian as anybody else. I wouldn't have really put any stock in what the word meant, mm-hmm. outside of, culturally we were a Christian culture.
Yeah, and I guess Christian is that Christ follower and someone who...
Yes, and I wouldn't have really identified that as what a Christian was. I was just thinking church or So they kept disappearing on me every Tuesday at lunch. So one day I said to them, well, maybe I'll go down and see what you guys are doing. So we go down underneath, and it was literally underground by 15 feet or so, well underground, and you could travel these underground tunnels at the university campus, and down under this ground there was a place where the group met. Mm-hmm. And I found out the name of that group was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, the VCF group on campus mm-hmm. in Saskatoon. And it turned out that Howard was, in fact, the president of this club, which is just a student-led group. and they invite people who are interested in knowing something about God to join with them. So I ended up at this Bible study, and I mean they're in Romans chapter 1, and it's I am arguing with them the whole time.
Okay.
I mean I what do I know about it? Nothing. But I'm prepared to argue with.
Oh wow.
With all that I am, that I find, I think I'm offended. I'm offended.
yeah.
And they welcomed me into this group, and I kept going week by week, going through this Bible study, and I grew to really enjoy it. In fact, I remember one day I decided to walk home from the university, which was a good 5 miles, I think, from where I lived.
Yeah.
And I going down, walking home, I stopped at the United Church that we had failed to go to most of the time when Mom would give us the money to go to church.
Yeah.
But when we did go, I was sure that they had never told me anything like this. And I went up and I knocked on the door of the pastor's office, which was outside of the church. The church was locked, but there was this pastor's office entrance. So I knocked at that door. I was going to ask him, why didn't you tell me this?
Tell him what?
Well, I had been learning about Christ, and I was finding it entirely intriguing.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, I didn't know any of this, as though it's somebody else's fault, right? Like Bill Hall has still not learned how to be honest about who he is.
Right.
Really, I'm kind of sure if I don't know something, it's somebody else's fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not my own lack of paying attention. He wasn't there, and I'm glad, because it probably wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
I would have looked pretty stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was something else that happened that was really significant that fall. A guy was invited. He was a black comedian from the States who had become, he was a Christian, but he was there to talk about all that was going on in the States. He wanted to talk about Martin Luther King and the importance of what King was doing in trying to bring about a freedom for the black people, an acceptance of, an understanding of who they were. Mm-hmm. And this was, there was a lot of stuff going on that fall, but this guy was unbelievably funny and articulate, and was really suggesting to all of us university students that had gathered, and this was not Christians, like this brought out, it filled the auditorium that the guy was speaking in. People wanted to know about Martin Luther King. They wanted to be involved in the discussions that were happening. And Canadians felt strongly supportive, and we didn't really understand why they were not able to see black people other than through a servant.
Right.
That your role is it is not to be accepted. You don't have a right to be in our schools. You don't have a right. And of course, so this was all very important, and it left me wanting to find out more about Martin Luther King Jr. So when I left there that day, I went immediately to the library to try to find a book written by Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
And the book that I picked up was it was a set of sermons that were by Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
And the one, I read a number of them, but the one that just grabbed me was his story of what it meant for him to have become a Christian. And he is a black preacher, but I think it was the first time that I'd really heard it articulated in a way that I felt the hunger, a desire in my soul. And I put it together with the Bible study, with what we were doing. Of course I did.
Right.
And the person of Jesus was suddenly more real to me, more, or maybe this has something to do with my life, or maybe there's something that I haven't really understood, some decision that maybe I need to think about. I think it just advanced me from being in a discussion where I could be kind of standing off and talking about it and philosophizing, but not really hearing it personal. But both the speaker at that event and the book translated into becoming a real existential question.
Okay.
Who am I? And is there a God? Now, my answer to that would have been no way. I wasn't ready yet to say I believe that there's a God.
Yeah.
But I was at least willing to acknowledge that people that I admired deeply were Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I was beginning to see that there's something here that I have ignored in my life.
Yeah.
So that was really, those were important first steps as I look back.
For sure, yeah.
And then Howard invited me they were going to have a camp in the wintertime in January up at Christopher Lake, which is about 2.5, 3 hours north of Saskatoon.
Okay.
And they had rented the facility up there, the Christopher Lake Bible Camp.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a gathering of the university students, whoever would want to go.
Okay.
And they had a special speaker named Neil Graham, whose father at one point had been the dean, not just the dean, I think he was the president. I can't remember the title of the chancellor, whatever, of the University of Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Neil Graham was going to be the speaker, and he was now working for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship as a professional person, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was an incredible moment. Neil spoke brilliantly, talked about the incident in Mark chapter 2 where some friends had brought a paralytic to see Jesus, and they couldn't get into such a big crowd had gathered to hear Jesus. They couldn't get in. They couldn't get him to the front. So the friends were very creative. They went up onto the roof and dug through the thatch and lowered their friend on a mat down in front of Jesus. And Jesus healed the paralytic. Mm-hmm. And you know, Neil, when he was done, said, maybe some of you have been helped to come to a place where you'd like to meet Jesus. You're ready for that. And I knew that if he wasn't speaking to me, that it was a real question to me.
Yeah.
Am I ready to make a commitment to Christ? Because I knew that my friends had been bringing me, they had been helping me to be at this place where I was learning about Jesus. Mm-hmm. But I think the pressure was too much. Bill Hall was still too much of a runner, still too much not ready to give up his own right to think the way he wants.
Right.
And about everything. And so I didn't go forward. I didn't sort of accept that as a moment when I would accept Christ. And so I continued to be very involved with the university, continued to go to their Dagwood suppers, had other opportunities when people were trying to get me to maybe make a move because they could see that I was really interested. I mean, there was no hiding that. I found Jesus absolutely captivating. I found the Gospels captivating. I totally was, on one level, very, in a sense, ripe. Like right. I was really, but the question of, is there a God? Was, and can, if I pray, is it even remotely possible that God can hear me?
Right.
And I said, there are billions of people. There weren't as many then as now.
Yeah.
But there are a lot. How can he hear us speaking? A cacophony of noise. How is it possible for me to conceive that God hears prayer? I could not get over. This was a stumbling block to me. It kept me from, I couldn't imagine. It's hard enough for me as an individual to believe that you're listening to me, let alone God, or that people out in Nether Neverland who are listening can all hear at the same time.
Yeah.
Maybe internet should actually help me to realize that it is possible to hear a lot of voices at once.
Yeah, you got some headphones in.
Yeah. I didn't because I couldn't get past that. That was a stumbling block.
Okay.
And then I realized if I'm not ready to make a decision, it had become a bit of an agonizing thing. One of the things that was interesting, Judah, is I was asked that we were going to have a skating party.
Okay.
And with the university, when you would meet with that group, when you would meet, say, to go skating, then afterwards you go back to somebody's house and there'd be a gathering. And in that gathering, there'd usually be a devotional or some kind of thought. So they said, well, we have nobody to give the devotional. And I said, oh, I'll do it. And they looked at me and they said, you will? Like, on what? I said, I'll think of something. So, but I went home and you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to understand prayer. Okay. So where do you think I went? So the Bible's a big book. Where do you go if you want to know anything about prayer? Well, I went to probably the hardest portion in Scripture if you don't believe. Even if you do believe, but hardest maybe to really, can be the hardest to really grab a hold of, and that's the Jesus' longest prayer in John 17, when he's praying that people might, he's praying for his disciples and for the people of the world. Yeah. That they might know you, Father, and that they might understand you, right? So I'm going to try to understand prayer, and I'm going to try to lead them in this devotional, which, I mean, the audacity, the audacity of me to be believed that I actually had anything to contribute to this. Yeah. And when I was done, I had talked myself into a corner, and when I left that night, I thought, I'm not going back. I stepped away from it. I realized I don't know how I can move forward or backward. I feel like I'm stuck in this middle. Okay. And it was also getting close. We were within about 3 weeks from the end of the academic year, and then final exams would be happening, and I was in my second year, so it was important that I really focus on my exams. So I did step away, and so for 5 weeks, I didn't have any conversations with any of them. I kind of avoided
the topic
and avoided the people. Yeah. I just kind of, but, and I did fine in my exams and all, that was all good. But at the end near the end of that time, it was around the 15th of April, my last exam was written, and I noticed on the board in the arts building in the University of Saskatchewan that there was a notice that Howard had put up saying, a number of us are planning to go to Alberta to help a camp, Pioneer Camps, get ready for their summer program. So it's a work camp. Mm-hmm. And if any of you are interested in coming,
open invite.
Yeah, an open invite. And I phoned Howard, and he said, and if any of you have a car, that would really be helpful, because we have a few people who still need rides.
Yeah.
And so I phoned Howard, and I said, Howard, I'd be glad to go, and I have a car, and I'll take people. Mm-hmm. So we went off 500 miles away from Saskatoon to Rocky Mountain House to do the work at the camp. Mm-hmm. You know, that was partly because Neil Graham was one of the leaders of Pioneer Camps in Alberta. So I'm sure that Neil had been talking to some of the kids and had encouraged them to think about coming out to camp for the summer, or at least to come to a work camp. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we go out there. There were actually 25 people, 5 carloads that went from U of S, Saskatoon, to Rocky Mountain House. And on the first night, Judah, when we gathered, the thing that really, that I didn't expect, but I didn't realize, I had been missing something during those 4 weeks. I thought I was just missing my friends.
Yeah.
But the moment the man opened the Bible and began to talk, I said, that's what I'm missing. I'm missing the Word of God.
Yeah.
Like it had become precious to me.
Yeah.
Precious to me when I would read it. It was, now I'd say that the Word was a living Word.
Yeah.
And it was changing me.
Mm-hmm.
And my absence from the group, it was what was far more real, was that I missed that word.
Okay.
I was astonished by that. And I was just sitting there. We were studying the book of Nehemiah, a small book hidden away in the Old Testament. But it was that was speaking to my heart.
Wow.
And so then 2 days later, it was a Sunday morning, we're having the first of our worship services. Mm-hmm. It was on a Sunday. We only had one time when we gathered in a worship service, and it was that Sunday. And we sang a song. It's an old song written by, the name of the writer is escaping my mind. Here's the verses. Long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound in sin and nature's night. Thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I woke, the dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. It's called Amazing Love. And it is John Wesley was the writer.
Okay.
Or was it Charles? One of the Wesley brothers.
Yeah.
And that, it was, I was just weeping. I mean, tears were just falling down. And a guy sitting fairly close to me at the end of the service. He said, I wondered if you wanted to go for a walk. I mean, I noticed that you were pretty touched by that. Did you want to just go for a walk?
Yeah.
So Ed and I went out for a walk, and he said, so Bill, he said, what was happening? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, that's a good question. I said, I think this absence that I had and my realization of how much I missed the scripture.
Right.
And how much I'm enjoying. I mean, maybe it's everything, but mostly I think it's just that I realize that there's something in Jesus and in this word that, like, I know that's speaking to my heart. I know that. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, have you never made a commitment? And I said, no. He said, do you want to?
Right.
Do you want to become a Christian now? Do you want to make a commitment? Mm-hmm. Can I lead you in prayer? And I said, no. No. I mean, this is just typically, I just wanted to step back. It was almost like, I don't know what I want to do with this, but I don't think I want to do this. And he said, so he said, when he had said, well, okay, when I had said, no, I'd rather you don't, he said, well, listen. He said, you don't need to say anything or pray, but I feel like I don't want to just walk away from this without praying. So would you mind if I just prayed? And so I said, you sure. So he prayed he just prayed for me.
Prayed for you,
Yeah. And I didn't intend to pray. In fact, he had asked me, you could always pray, and I said, I'm not going to, right? He had asked me, and I said, no. This is before he prayed. He said, well, I'm going to pray anyway. And so he had prayed. Unbidden and without my intention, I began to pray.
Wow.
And the moment that I began to pray, God did a thing in me. Like, I just began to weep uncontrollably. And then I began to laugh out loud and just uproariously, because I felt both this great grief of sin and the great release.
Right.
But it wasn't just the one thing. It was like a wash tub. It just went round and round. It was... Wow. It was, I mean, I'm not trying to say that this is anybody else's experience. This was just my experience. Mm-hmm. But it was that moment in which God revealed himself to me. Yeah. Changed me.
Wow.
Changed me, and I never been the same. Because I told you I hadn't really understood who I was. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of gaps in my understanding about life. Mm-hmm. And but from the time that I made that commitment to Christ, life really began to make sense to me. I began to see who I was. I understood that I had a purpose in life. I understood that that God and God's love was in the world, and that God intended for me to be part of something much bigger. It's like a whole part of me had never really been alive, and now it was.
Cool.
And that just was a revolutionary, a big change for me. Well, thank you for listening, and if I want to give a shout out to my wife Sandra and to my children and grandchildren. And if you want to hear more of my story, just let you know. Thanks. Bye.